You're listening to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere, a podcast featuring compelling conversations with exceptional people. Whether it's an inspirational achievement, a hardship overcome, or simply a unique perspective, these are stories we can all learn from. Here are your hosts, Jamie Serino and Carlos Arcila.
Hello and welcome. This is There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. I'm Jamie Serino, and I'm here today with Julie Davitz, who's the founder of Plus Media Solutions. And we're going to learn all about the amazing work that they do. And Julie started her career and spent most of her career working in impact on both the for-profit side and the nonprofit side. And we'll hear a little bit more about that. And through Julie's travels, she realized that there were some problems with getting people to do stuff. And so how can we get people to donate and spend time and volunteer and actually follow through on the things that they want to do? And that will be a big part of the conversation today, motivating and then getting people to do the things that they actually want to do that will support causes that they believe in. So, Julie, I'll turn it over to you for more complete introduction. And if you could go into, some of your career, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jamie. Really fun to be here chatting with you. You're absolutely right. I mean, my through line has been around positive social change and started way back when in San Francisco with a family, a Silicon Valley family, who sold their company and wanted to do good. So they carved out 100 million of the profit, and they turned it over to me and said, okay, figure it out. So that was a great opportunity to build a private family foundation. And over 12 years, we really made a dent or an impact in the California literacy program. And in fact, we developed a program that is now part of the curriculum in California schools, a take-home library program. So that was really my first foray into formal kind of nonprofit impact. From there, I went to work with a Nobel laureate at the University of California, San Francisco, and helped him build the Institute for Neurodegenerative Diseases. And that was, even though I am not a scientist, I certainly learned a lot about neurodegenerative diseases and really opened my eyes to our healthcare system all over the world. Because neurodegenerative diseases are not geographically specific. And then from there, I moved to New York City and had my own consulting firm working with ultra high net worths, corporations, foundations, individuals who really wanted to make a difference, both with their for-profit capital, regular dollars to invest, and then charitable dollars to invest. And that then led me to being head of impact for North America at BNP Paribas Bank of the West. BNP is the 7th or 8th largest global bank in the world. And that was an amazing platform to think about how to make change at scale. But all of those pieces kind of fell into place and has made up Plus Media. So it's been an exciting journey.
Nice. And so, what some people don't realize is that it actually can be difficult to give away money, right? And you discovered that. You got dropped in there and you're like, why is it so difficult to give away money?
Oh my gosh, yes. For so many reasons. I mean, most people probably are familiar with Dan Pallotta's great book called Uncharitable, and there's a film out now on that. But it is complicated for human reasons. There are a lot of egos involved in philanthropy. And it's complicated for systemic reasons, because these problems, most of the problems that philanthropy looks at, poverty, healthcare, education, these are so deep and so tangled and so ingrained. Um, and lastly, I would say, the US in particular, we don't have a good social safety net here. So there's a lot of pressure on philanthropy to fill that gap. Whereas, the programs that I've seen working in Europe and elsewhere are much more robust and feel much more effective in terms of systems change. So yes, it is a complicated sector.
And there was something you said earlier too that reminded me of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I feel like they kind of were stepping in and maybe trying to like get corporations to step up a little bit, to sort of step in there, and if they define these goals and these sort of columns where the money could go, then it made it a little bit easier, you know. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the UN SDGs. And in fact, everything that Plus Media does internally, we frame around
Oh,
the
nice.
UN Sustainable Development Goals. We can talk about that later. But since they've been established, it definitely gives clarity to corporations, to brands, to foundations, and hopefully to individuals as well. I think of them as a roadmap or framework, or some people say goalposts. Sometimes when I talk about them in public, I still have to explain what they are. They're not a sexually transmitted disease. They are
Yeah, right.
the roadmap for a healthier people and planet. And they're very, very smart and very effective. It works for corporations because it gives these businesses something to hang on to.
Right.
And that's not to say that you've got to hit all of those 17
Right.
and all of the numerous points under each of the 17. But what's helpful is to say, okay, I'm a brand. Let's just say I produce, soft drinks. So that involves water. So you might want to focus on what can I do around SDG, I believe it's 5, and I should know that off the top of my head,
Right.
around clean water.
Yeah.
And that's a great just starting point, and then measure against that framework. And that really helps the corporation know where they're going. And it also helps them communicate to their constituents, their shareholders, how they're doing on
Right.
this.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
a really important aspect of it, the measurement. And also, I think stopping like the shotgun blast approach. And you've probably been, in the field enough to see the movement away from that, right? Could you talk a little bit about like, because I remember being at corporations and it was like, yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then I remember the shift and people would get annoyed. Like, can you sponsor this? Like, no, no. Like, why? No, because we're putting all the money here to have more of an impact. And
right.
then it makes sense for people. But, it's a hard pill to swallow at first, right? So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that shift.
Yeah, it is hard for those great NGOs and nonprofits who are out there looking for financial support. But as someone who's worked on both sides of that line, it is really important to take into account alignment and focus. So for corporations, whether or not they have a foundation, they have to put their stake in the ground.
Mhm.
That shotgun effect doesn't work.
Right.
And when you can align the corporate product, the corporate set of values, the corporate initiatives with something that's really clear, like one or more of the UN SDGs, that just helps everyone row in the same direction.
Yeah.
And it ends up being a unifier, both internally and externally for that corporation. And it helps them put up some kind of of fence really around. There's a limited amount of dollars. I mean, even
Right.
if you're the biggest corporation in the world, you can't just keep granting out money to things that
Right.
sound good.
Right.
It's got to be more strategic. So I think I really lean on the alignment as the most important, so that the brand matches the cause.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a very appropriate story at a conference on sustainable brands recently, and it was given by the head of sustainability at Mars. And Mars produces M&Ms, but they had a campaign that linked M&Ms to wind power.
Hmm.
It fell terribly flat, because I mean, when you look at M&Ms, when you're eating an M&Ms, is there any alignment with wind power at all?
Yeah.
No. So, you know, that campaign went nowhere, and they
Right.
really learned about alignment, and I'm all for that.
Yeah, and because as you were talking there, I was thinking too about some of the brands that really stand out because they do focus on certain things, like, Patagonia, like there's some obvious ones, right?
Right.
So when there's a company maybe where it's less obvious, do you have any like advice for them? Even like B&P, I mean, you could probably talk about, I don't know, like microfinance, and you could, there's probably a bunch of things there. But what would you say to a company where it isn't quite as obvious as we use a lot of water, or we're with the environment, or we're in education,
Mm-hmm. You know, at least from my experience, because I'm always looking at things from an impact lens,
Hmm.
I find those threads. I mean, I have yet to come across a company, a client who doesn't have, something that they can align with,
Yeah.
whether it's regenerative ag or green chemicals or reforestation, or,
Yeah.
it's there. Um, if they really are interested, it's there. And the
Yeah.
great thing is, we know that when you move towards that, that impact or purpose or sustainability, whatever you want to call it, it is good for business. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the bottom line. It's
Yeah.
good internally, it's good externally, it's certainly good long term,
Yep.
for your ROI. And we feel strongly that by holding people to account and then communicating the best sustainability story and measuring that, that leads to increased ROI.
Yeah, and there are studies even that show that it can even move the stock price. So those studies there are out there now. So how have you seen the measurement of this change? Because I feel like I've seen that change a lot too. Between knowing where to put the dollars and the resources, sometimes these things are hard to measure, right? These, you're funding something, and sometimes it's pretty obvious, but other times it's not so. So what are your thoughts on that?
So measurement is a huge reason of why I launched Part Plus Media, and here's why. You touched on that. People, for example, let's just take films, any kind of content, video, documentary, mainstream TV, all of that. We'll throw it into one bucket. There's a lot of time and effort and money that go into most of that production, right? And a lot of, I'd say a large percentage of that content bucket has to do with some kind of social impact. It tells some story, it's highlighting an issue or topic, it's uncovering maybe a really uncomfortable challenge that we have in the world. So all of that money and all of that time goes into telling that story. And then what happens? I
Mm,
mean, we're left. And those content producers for years have thought, well, the audience, they can go off and they can do what they want to do. And then they measure the impact of their story by eyeballs or likes and shares, when the fact is that doesn't move the needle on any of those issues.
Yeah.
So that's one reason why I started Plus Media. I feel that measurement is so important to affecting social change. If we can measure what's resonating with audiences, what's resonating with consumers, what are people willing to do, what are people willing to learn, and then track that, then we can know what's working. Is our message working? Are consumers making smarter choices because of that sustainability communication? We need to know that. We can't just keep putting out these ads and videos and producing these events and expecting people to make the change. We have to give them the tools to make change, and we need to measure that change.
Yeah, that's great, because it definitely goes a level deeper. So I think, because it was difficult to measure for a while, no one was really measuring much. And then people started to measure. And then I think they felt satisfied with, okay, impressions, eyeballs, likes, shares, signing up for the newsletter, things like that. And that is great, and you're getting eyeballs and you're getting people, maybe you are inspiring people. But then the action, so you're talking about going a level deeper to that action. And it's funny you mentioned the documentaries and stuff, because I saw a documentary about the food industry, and I'm like, maybe I'll become a vegan now after watching that.
Right, but
I
wouldn't
don't
it
know
be
if I will.
cool?
I'm not going to say I will, but if I did, then it was because of that documentary, right? And so, or right now the documentary is making me walk around talking about it, which is helpful. But what is it really? Maybe I'll donate more money to certain things. Maybe I will cut down on eating meat or chicken or whatever. I don't know. But you're bringing up a great point. So could you talk more about, arriving at that, and then how do you really get in there and know, like, okay, this person did that because they consume that piece of content?
Right. That is a little bit of a scary answer, but I will respond. But I would say that to your comment about maybe you'll become, a vegan, or maybe you'll donate. It's the maybe that we are focused on. So when you're watching that documentary on, the food waste or food systems, if at the moment that you're interested, you had a Plus Media menu that you could learn more about what it means to be vegan, maybe get some vegan recipes, maybe there's a one-click donation, maybe there's a podcast that you could listen to, all of that
Yep.
catching you at that moment of inspiration, so that you will decide to learn more, you will take an action. And then from there, to your question about how do you track and know what people are doing after they have expressed interest and watched a film or attended an event, or even at point of purchase with a brand. So today's technology has developed, exponentially. And if people think that they are not being tracked, they're being really naive.
Yeah.
It is part of our life.
Yes.
So what Plus Media does is we track that behavior. It's anonymous. We don't collect any personal information at all, but we can follow that viewer. If that viewer decides, oh, I want to listen to that podcast on how to become vegan, or I want to download those recipes, or I'll sign a petition, or I will donate, or you name it. Through our tech tags, we track that behavior, and we can tell then the content producer or the brand or the event producer what people are actually doing when they are watching or listening to their messaging.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you're just taking well, not to just, you're just doing this or just doing that, but you're taking, what's happening in the marketing world and sort of using it for good.
Right.
And so, because what in the marketing world, people will say it takes 7, 8, or 9 touches to get someone to make a buying decision, especially if it's something expensive, or especially if it's like business to business and things like that. And there's a great like marketing cartoon where it sort of shows this, and this guy's driving and he sees a billboard about a sneaker. He opens a magazine, there's a sneaker. He looks on TV and the star is wearing the sneaker, and he keeps seeing the sneaker. Then he sees the sneaker on his computer and he clicks on it and he buys it. And then in the last frame, you see the people in the boardroom and they're like, so this is why we need to put more money into digital. So like, and they're forgetting about all those other touches, right? And so the same thing is happening with a person, and it might even be a bigger hurdle to get someone to donate, or you're talking about changing people's behavior, changing habits, right? Eating habits or whatever they might be. And so you have to sort of pull them along. Like you're not going to go from the first touch to the buying decision. So you bring them along, just as you were describing, maybe a podcast next, or maybe an article, or something else, and keep going, keep going, keep going until they're ready. So I think it's great. So, do you have like, maybe an example or something of how that works?
Yeah, we describe that as the ladder or the continuum of engagement, and that's really where our expertise comes in on the front end of our work with a client. So I would start by describing the process, and I'll give you an example. So what we know, the actions that, or the messaging that requires consumers to take an action and that will lead to behavior change has to be very, very specific. And there's so much research on this. Someone will take an action if they understand that it's relevant to them, it's contextual to them, it affects their health, their wealth, their personal world. So when we get a project, for example, we're working on a film right now that is talking about the importance of health and nutrition for inner city youth. Great film called Generation Growth. And we've had tremendous audience engagement in this because the curation on the front end is alignment with the story and giving the viewers opportunities to take action, to learn more or buy something or do something that makes sense to them. And it can be anything from buy a kit to start your own garden at home, to downloading toolkits, to bringing how to duplicate this work and bring it to your local school, set up a screening. And we're always changing the opportunities that we offer to align with that content so that it matches the audience that's watching the content. So it's always relevant, it's always contextual, and that brings really high engagement rates. So you're not just plugging in a hashtag, donate $5 to whatever. I have to understand why this is important to me. Yes, I'm predisposed to the topic because I've watched the film, but I want to know why I should take that next step.
Yeah,
And that's what we do.
that's great. And so when an organization wants to engage with you, they'll say, okay, I've got this, film, or I have this campaign and I'm about to launch it. And then that's when they engage with you and you sort of lay out all those steps. Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that process, the planning?
Exactly. So, I'd say the bulk of our work has fallen, even though we serve all of those 17 UN SDGs that we talked about, it tends to fall in the environmental group.
Okay.
So if someone is doing a campaign around something related to climate or environment, we will first understand what are their goals, what are their KPIs, their key performance indicators. So taking those and looking at what they're going to be using for their messaging. Is it video? Is it social channels? Is it, events? It could be all of the above. Then how can we translate that into concrete actions for the audience in learn and act opportunities? And those learn and act opportunities need to be measurable. So we do all of that work, the research and curation, and we come up with various menus that are appropriate for all of these different demographics. If they're, looking to target Gen Z on social, we've got a menu for that. If they're looking to activate audiences at a big event, we have that. So it's all very personalized. It's a very personal engagement experience. And then, of course, on the back end, we're measuring all of that user behavior so that the campaign knows what's working. Is our message really getting out? Are people activating towards the goals that we have set out? If they're not, let's figure out why and switch things up.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned a lot of environmental causes and stuff. So because I wanted to ask you a little bit about, some trends and stuff. So those are the types of organizations that are coming to you more often, you feel like? Is it just because maybe word of mouth and in your services, or are people more in tune with we need to do something about the environment? Yeah, because what I will say is anecdotally, my oldest son's in third grade, and they had to work on a project, and every kid, they were in pairs, every single pair did something about the environment. It was amazing. It was so amazing. They were allowed to do anything. Just had to be, you're gonna fix a problem that's out there. That was it. Everyone did something on the environment. Now, sure, they were probably influencing each other, but it was really interesting to see that's what the outcome was there. So yeah, so you're just seeing more organizations turning their attention to that?
I do. I think I think there are a couple of things at play. We just happen to be working on a number of films that touch on some climate or environmental issue. I mean, we worked on Extrapolations, which was on Apple TV, episodic climate film series. And there's some really interesting ones coming up. I think the plethora of content production around climate and environmental issues shows that awareness raising really might not be as important any longer. What is, in your third grade example is perfect. What's really important is getting people doing something.
Yeah.
And that's really where my frustration has been, in that, great, we've got the awareness raising covered.
Yep.
Climate change is a problem.
Yep.
What are we going to do about it? And that's where these films are saying, oh yeah, we need to get people doing something after we motivate them and inspire them with our content.
Yep.
Same with events. And I'd say the same goes for brands, because if the brand is, committed to sustainability, to recycle, reuse, repair, all of those great things, then communicate it to your consumer and use it for, marketing, because it's very positive and consumers respond to that.
Yep. So, yeah, you were saying something in there, about we know there's a problem. And I was just reading an article about that. And, an environmental scientist was saying, like, we don't, and there was a psychologist that was interviewed too. And they were like, yeah, we don't think heaping more data onto this, like there's a problem, is going to help, because we know, like, and we keep hearing about it, but no one is, you don't say no one's doing anything, but it's now, I think, to that next step, and you keep going there, like, what's the next step? What's the next step? And this action taking. Um, so have you seen any trends with, like, different generations, between wanting to become active or wanting to donate or wanting to take some sort of action?
Yes, there are some pretty clear trends. And you mentioned donate. I think one of the biggest trends is away from donating.
Mm,
And that's a big reason why we work so hard on the curation on the front end when we're really thinking about what can people do around this issue. They don't always want to give money.
mm,
Maybe they will further down the line, but they need to be convinced first that I'm comfortable with this. This makes sense to my life. I think that there's been too much emphasis placed on just donate, just give money, and that's
yeah.
going to solve it. So one of the things that we really try to focus on is giving people options of how they can engage with the issue, with the topic, beyond donating. Of course, donations really is what most organizations want to have happen, but there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid there. I think particularly for younger audiences and younger generations, they're willing to get involved. They're willing to volunteer, to do meetups, to do social campaigns, not necessarily donate right off the bat.
Yeah, that's probably good. I mean, of course the money is needed. And maybe some people it's, oh, I'll just donate money, but if people are willing to spend time and actually, effort, then that's a whole other layer there, so maybe that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Um, so besides, so you talked a little bit about environment, you talked a little bit about education. Are there any other, and especially with your organization being aligned with the SDGs, are there any other ones that you see a little bit more attention, a little more focus on?
It's interesting. I mean, we very much expected to get involved with some organization this year around just promoting democracy. I mean,
Yeah.
we try and stay very centrist.
Yeah.
We're not a political organization, and I've been surprised that our system has not been used as yet around these democratic with a small d issues.
Yeah.
It's something that has just struck us. Um, Other than that, I mean, homelessness, affordable housing has been
Yeah.
big. Education is another really big one. And we're very excited about there's been legislation passed in the EU. It's called a digital product passport. And every item that is sold in the EU in the coming years requires this DPP, this digital product passport, which could be a great thing if it's used properly. So what we are looking at is using that DPP as a way to communicate sustainability much more clearly to consumers and to move those consumers' dollars and hence behavior to a better cycle of that circular economy system
Yeah.
that we're looking towards. So I think that's a big trend and a big topic that is coming up that hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet in the US.
Yeah. Well, it's leading me to think about, just educating people about, a lot of people, including myself, don't realize the impact that they might have on the environment, on the world. Like that documentary about food. One fact that keeps sticking in my mind is that it said it takes I think 25 pounds of feed to get 1 pound out of the cow. right? Which is like so inefficient. Like, why would we do that? You
Right.
know? And so it's like, I mean, I don't eat that much meat, but it just makes me wonder, like, oh, maybe I like
Yeah,
to,
maybe that hamburger just isn't looking so good anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So well, and then there's like local things you can do. So just sticking with that example, I actually know a cattle farmer, and then that feels a little better. But then I'm sure there's a bunch of other things. And so maybe embedded in that digital product would be like, here's the pressure that this product puts on the environment, and then that, and you then decide, do I need that or not? Um, so
That's a really good point because then the question for that brand is, do I want to communicate that to the
right.
consumer?
Do I feel
But
proud
there's a
about that?
way to, first of all, they're going to be regulated,
Right.
so that information is going to be out there. But you could also have a story that maybe that brand is really making an effort.
Yeah.
And that's a good story too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So then, it's like what you were saying earlier, and you line up, you have this alignment between your efforts and there are, I mean, Walmart's a good example of turning it around. Well, I don't know, I haven't looked at them in a while, but they were turning it around. And becoming a little bit more aware. So you get companies and brands out there that maybe realize, they get shown, and then they change. So that can happen. And just going back to something you and I were talking about before we hit record here, was the change even in just phrases that are used. And and this happens in all industries and fields and stuff, but I think it's a little bit more it's a little more like emotional here, maybe, or the relationship between how you might think about something, or how a word or a phrase can become, sullied in some way, and there are people out there, I guess, maybe trying to do that, or maybe it happens by accident or whatever. But we were talking about like phrases like social good and CSR, and so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And I think it's an interesting topic of just language change and phrases and stuff, and that whole journey, I guess, that we've all taken.
Yeah, yeah. When I started out in the, broad, I use impact in a very broad sense. When I started out, there was philanthropy and there, charitable giving, straight up, very clear, and just the beginnings of socially responsible investing, even though socially responsible investing has actually been around in the US for a very long time. It was started by actually a religious organization way back when. That's a whole nother story. Um, and at that time, it was quite clear. Either you made a charitable donation or you invested your dollars aligned with your values, and you were sure to lose money.
Right.
And then everything changed. There became, charity even became much more complicated because you have things like donor advised funds.
Right.
And in the donor advised funds and in your philanthropic endowment, if you have a foundation, you can invest those dollars into for-profit investments, hopefully that are also aligned with your values. But then social responsible investing, just caught on fire, and it became impact investing and values aligned investing and all of these things. And then growing out of those two sort of parallel movements, then we started to have CSR, corporate social responsibility in companies. And then out of that, we got DE&I. Now we have heads of sustainability at most corporations. And then flowing out of that, we have a lot of chief creative officers, chief, innovation officers. And for whatever reason, a lot of these titles became very problematic and political. I think that when we started with socially responsible investing, it was clear that no one was making money. And so that, unfortunately, that belief, which was true at the time, has really stuck. But it's not true any longer.
Yeah.
And that, I think, really holds people up. And then on the philanthropic side, when you have a CSR officer, it's not just feel good. It's actually for the good of the company, which is directly tied to bottom line. It all becomes very touchy. And when, I think that we should just be looking at it, this is for the common good. It's for the good of a business. It's for the good of a cause. It's for the good of the employees. Language is constantly evolving, and our approach to social good is constantly evolving. I would say it's great that ESG and the UN SDGs and impact investing, I think, has become part of more mainstream conversation.
Yeah, I think it has. And yeah, I guess like what I've seen at different companies is, I mean, now of course there's a lot of awareness on employee well-being and, mental health and stuff, and that gets sometimes tied into that as well. So it does seem to be ever changing. And I guess how you end up defining yourself within the field, maybe you do have to be careful, but there now are different perceptions of these different acronyms and words and stuff, which is interesting how it all developed. So Julie, what is your website so everyone knows where to go?
www.plusmedia, all lowercase one word, .solutions, Plus Media Solutions.
Great, very easy. Plus Media Solutions. Is there anything else that you feel like I didn't ask or you want to let everybody know?
I think, going back to really where we started, stories are great. Stories make us human. We love them, but they don't make change. People make change. And what we've been missing is that bridge to give people tools to take action that feel right to them, and then measuring what actually works. So it's not complicated. It just hasn't existed before. And when something's new, people have a lot of questions about it. But it's time for people to act on their interests and to act for the common good. And Plus Media is just there to make it easy and measurable.
That's well said. You're reminding me of like when you're at like a gala, and you're there and you're feeling inspired, and then people start, there's the auction or who wants to donate more, and everyone starts, and you're getting people when they feel passionate, right? And that's the whole thing, is that when you watch something, then you literally can wake up the next day and sort of shrug your shoulders about it, like.
Right.
And go and not recycle that can or whatever,
Yeah.
But when you have that passion, you just saw this thing, then boom, you get hit with that next thing, and keep on that path. And that's the key. And that is really a key thing, I think, when you're talking about, impact and social good and whatnot, is that there are these moments of passion and they do become easily forgotten. But when you can act on them, and the thing is too, like what you're doing, people want that,
Right.
that, and they want that path. You're clearing a
Right.
path for them. They'll take that path, they'll follow that passion, so that an action is made, and it's great. Well, Julie, thank you for joining us. I learned a lot, and
Good,
I,
thank
I want to
you.
I want to thank everyone for watching or listening, and we'll see you next time.
Great.